Okay, so the title of the presentation is The Role of Information and Communications Technology in Environmental Conservation and Management. And I'm doing this in the framework of your ENV 2202 course. My name is Vidyarth Kisoon, and that is my email address if anybody wants any further details. As I told you, I've prepared a sort of a resource directory folder. So if you have your USB drive, you can get copies of the presentation and some of the additional resources that I've used. As part of the environmental considerations, I very rarely print handouts now for any meetings. So in this discussion, what I'm going to do is to look at the concepts around ICT. I'm going to look at the policy background to e-environment and where IT and environment have intersected in policy. I'm going to look first at the challenges to ICT use when we consider the environment. I'm going to look at some of the applications. I'm going to discuss some of the ideas for action which youth students and future professionals within environmental sciences or in geology. And then, of course, we'll have some discussion depending on what you have. So the definition of information and communications technology, broad-based technology, including the methods, management, and applications that supports the creation, storage, manipulation, and communication of information. And this is a 1996 definition from French. It's a very old definition, but one that is still relevant. So it's just important to understand, it's not just the devices that we have, our phones and computers and laptops and things like that, but it also consists of the mechanism for transmission, so it includes the satellites, the transmitting stations, there is the towers, and also the systems and procedures that guide all of that transmission. And some of the definitions of ICT include what were the more traditional communication media such as radio and television. And as some of you know, that radio and television are converging now. How many of you listen to radio on your phone? Does anybody do that here? Right, so you're already doing that. How many of you listen to radio on the internet, like on your computer? Right, so we're already seeing that convergence, right? So another concept is the idea of the information society. And the information society is one in which the creation, the distribution, the use, integration, and manipulation of information is a significant economic, political, and cultural activity. The aim of the information society is to gain competitive advantage internationally through using IT in a creative and productive way. And out of the information society, we have a concept called the knowledge economy, in which wealth is created through the economic exploitation of understanding. And the knowledge economy is an idea that comes after this thing of the industrial economy, in which the sale of products, where the economy is just based on the marketing of products. The knowledge economy also says that it's also based on services and understanding of how products can be used. The other concept is resilience. Have you covered resilience yet in your environmental management courses, climate change? Okay. So resilience is common when we're talking about climate change, we're talking about environmental management and conservation. Resilience is the ability of a system, and in your context, a system is the ecosystem that we're working with, to withstand, recover, and change in the face of an external disturbance, such as an acute or chronic climate change, or in our case, the overtopping of the seawall, the 2005 floods. We don't have any earthquakes as yet. But resilience constitutes an important property of livelihood systems, which through this set of 7 dynamic subproperties, robustness, scale, redundancy, rapidity, flexibility, self-organization, and another interesting thing is learning can enhance our adaptive capacity. Just a little side note, resilience is also used in terms of how we deal in our lives with issues in our lives. Basically, we might have a major crisis in our lives, like a breakup, or death in the family, or loss of a job, or something. But our resilience is based on how we adapt to it, how we change, if we have to change or transform as a result of that major crisis, and then what we learn from that crisis, and how we react to that crisis so that we can improve the next time we face the crisis. So the idea of e-resilience is a new one, and I quote from a blog run out of the University of Manchester in which they're promoting this idea. It's a property of livelihood systems in which ICTs interact with a set of resilient sub-properties, enabling the system to adapt to the effects of climate change. So it's how we use IT to deal with those, to deal with our learning, how we capture knowledge, how we use IT to analyze the data, etc., to improve our resilience. The other concept we talked about, knowledge economy, is that this idea of the green economy, and the green economy is something that was started by the United Nations Environmental Program. Have you discussed green economy already? In any courses? Yes, you have? You have?
Yes.
Right. Geology students? In a way, right. So the green economy, just to refresh you, is one that results in this improved human well-being and social equity, while significantly reducing environmental risks and ecological scarcities. And there are a whole set of, if course you've done green economy, you would know that there are a set of pillars on which the green economy is based. Green computing now we come down to the ICT, and this was promoted by Harnessing in an article called Green IT Principles and Practices. And basically, green computing, green IT or ICT sustainability, it refers to environmentally sustainable computing. And what he says is that it's the study and practice of designing, manufacturing, using, and disposing of computers, servers, and associated subsystems such as monitors, printers, storage devices, and networking communication systems effectively and efficiently with minimal or no impact on the environment. So what we have here, and we're now coming into this other idea that ICT in the environment is not only how we use ICT to benefit our environmental conservation, but how also we look at ICT and how our use of ICT does not damage the environment. And we'll look at e-waste and things like that a little bit later. So in this, it looks at ideas of hardware design, so the kinds of devices we use, what are the materials that go into it, can those materials be recycled? We look at issues of software design. Have any of you done any software programming?
Yes.
Yeah, some of you have done that. Right. So you might know that how we write code impacts on the way our processors work. And therefore, software design, the way our algorithms and so are generated, is that the better designed algorithms will reduce the consumption of power and hence link to efficient use of energy. And Roxroy and I were just talking about Linux. Have you heard of Linux? Anybody? Some of you have heard of Linux? Right. So I'm a big Linux fan. I'm using Ubuntu on my system. Roxroy has on the Ubuntu t-shirt by coincidence. We didn't plan to push this, but we will brainwash you about Linux because I have known personally that Linux, I've used an old laptop for 6 or 7 years with Linux, and my hard drive and so on continue to do it. And just because the way Linux is designed, it's that it runs more efficiently. So as you guys get into other applications, you'll find that you're using the kind of operating system you use will extend the life of your computer. Okay, so let's go into a little bit to the policy background. Probably a little bit boring, but depending on where you are going to be working, you probably want to have an idea that sometimes, because you're going to have to interact with some of the same policies and the same ideas in terms, so that you can get work. So we'll start in 1992 with the first, what was called the Earth Summit in Rio. You were born in 1992, some of you? Yeah, you would have been born in 1992. Anybody here? No, okay, right. Some of you were born, some of you were not born in 1992. So that's, we had the first Agenda 21. And then we had the World Summit on the Information Society in 2003 and 2005. And then we had Rio Plus 10 in last year, in 2012, in which we got the Future We Want. No, that's not Rio. That's the last, that's not plus 20. The UN CSD. And then, of course, we've got Guyana's low carbon development strategy, which is the current development strategy. And so I'm just going to show how ICT and the use of ICT fits into these policy documents and the history of it. So Agenda 21 says that ICTs could have been used to share information for sustainable development among stakeholders. Very simple line within that document. But what happened is that as a result of that commitment in 1992, there was a creation of what were called the Sustainable Development Networking Programs around the world. And in Guyana, we had one. And essentially what it was in Guyana, it was like at the time when the internet was now coming to Guyana, the internet sort of came to Guyana in 1996, about 1995, 96, commercial internet. And in 1997, SDNP in Guyana was launched. So it was like the first server providing email access to NGOs and public servants. It was dial-up internet, and also pushing local content. And the Help and Shelter website, Help and Shelter, the NGO, has been one of the NGOs that has had the longest running website since this time with SDNP. Right? And there were several others, because in many cases the SDNPs were the first internet providers in the countries, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in Haiti, in Malawi, all those places, right? So that was the original intention. Now, in 2003 and 2005, there were the two World Summits on the Information Society. So this is more looking at the IT side of things. And basically it said that the first concern was that governments, in cooperation with other stakeholders, are encouraged to use and promote ICTs as an instrument for environmental protection and the sustainable use of natural resources. And the second concern is very important, is that government, civil society, and the private sector are encouraged to initiate actions and implement projects and programs for the sustainable production and consumption and the environmentally safe disposal and recycling of discarded hardware and components used in ICTs. And in 2005, this was the only concern that was repeated, because it was growing concern about e-waste, about what do you do when these things fall apart? Where do you throw them? Because it creates a lot of problems. And then, of course, the third concern is to establish monitoring systems to forecast and monitor the impact of natural and man-made disasters, particularly in developing countries, less LDC, less development countries, and the small economies. Okay, so in 2012, the use of ICTs, again, on sustainable development, and this is how links into what we're talking about here, environmental management. It identified these kind of 5 themes, which are a little bit different. It says, first of all, that ICTs should be used to improve multi-stakeholder engagement in all decisions that are being made related to development and sustainable development. Do you understand what I mean when I say sustainable development? Have you heard this phrase? All right? Yeah, okay. And sustainable development is a very different concept from economic development and so on. The second item is that ICTs should be used for knowledge exchange and capacity building as it relates to management of the environment. The next concern is that ICTs should be used to help with food security and sustainable agriculture. What do you know is sustainable agriculture? What is sustainable agriculture? What do you think sustainable agriculture refers to? Anybody here from an agriculture area? Anybody? Sorry? Keeping it for the future, right? Anybody ever notice what's going on with the lands around on the environment? Anybody here living in cane lands? Old cane estates? sugarcane lands. We know that the soil becomes drained of its resources and all sorts of things start happening with fertilizers and pesticides. But one of the things I want to share with you is this anecdote from the FAO report. Did you know that to produce 1 pound of beef consumes the amount of resources that driving an SUV 10 miles of the country that will consume? That emission of carbons involved in production of 1 pound of beef, because of the amount of water and methane, because of the industrial production of beef. So there are people who are saying that if you want to save the environment, you should stop eating beef, because of the rate at which the beef production consumes, because it's way up on the food chain, it's consuming soya and land resources and so on. So this is the ideas of how agriculture can impact on the environment. And of course, food security is about how we have to better manage the resources in the face of climate change. The fourth idea is ICTs and energy efficiency. And the fifth idea is ICTs and youth education. Okay, and in Guyana's low carbon development strategies, I unfortunately could not find the original document on the LCDS website, so I'm just quoting here from the March 2013 update, is that generally Guyana's low carbon development strategy recognized ICT as a contributor to the economy and as a kind of an alternative to things like logging and so on, which would have people investing in this knowledge economy, because in the knowledge economy, ICTs play an important role, so that you move up the scale in terms of what you consume. And in March 2013, in the update, there's the affirmation: Guyana aims to have one of the most inclusive digital societies in the world by 2015, where all citizens have access to IT and high-speed internet. And there are three, under the subheading of expanding the digital economy and avoiding the digital divide, is that there are three themes here: the fiber optic cable coming from Brazil to Georgetown and along the coast, which is expected to work towards the e-governance project. And some of you might have been familiar with the Plaisance dispute with the siting of the tower. We then have the One Laptop for Family project, and then the ongoing telecoms liberalization. As you know, GT&T has a monopoly on some aspects of telecoms. And so there is an ongoing debate about liberalizing the sector to reduce the cost of telecommunications. Okay, so what are some of the challenges? I'll go to the challenges first before we look at the applications. One of the first challenges is this whole thing about e-waste. The second thing is the cost, and I want to introduce the idea of free and open source software here, which we will look at again a little bit later. We have the issue of skills, and we have the policy and legislative framework. So e-waste. One of the first things I thought about, I don't know if anyone even thought about, is that a laptop has 3 years, a life cycle of 3 years. And we're supposed to be investing in 90,000 of those things. And I have not seen, and we're already probably on 8 months into the laptop distribution. And I have not seen any plan that says what we're going to do with these 90,000 laptops when they reach the end of their lifetime. Now, e-waste, green computing, deals with e-waste. It's how we're going to create and use products. I just want to show you a little video clip here. Okay, now the cost. One of the things about IT, of course, is that one of the things about cost is that when we talk about digital divide issues, we're saying that those who cannot afford IT should not be discriminated against. And affording IT not only means affording the equipment and the energy to use the equipment, but also having access to the internet, being able to pay the bandwidth fees and user fees and things like that. So any governments around the world have to adopt this idea that there should be some what we call universal access policy. Universal access, of course, is something you might have heard about. For example, in many countries where telephone landline systems are, It says that not because you only have 10 people living in a village, it means that you should discriminate against that area from providing landline service because the economy doesn't work well. It says that those who are living in populated areas, the benefits, the way you design your marketing model, it should benefit those who are living in remote areas. So the OLPF is an example of a kind of initiative which tries to deal with the cost aspect of the digital divide. Now, the use of free and open source software. Free and open source software refers to software for which the license allows the user to copy, to use the software for whatever reasons they want, to redistribute the software, and to modify the software to suit their purposes. In Guyana, of course, because we have no intellectual property and a lot of us get cracks in school and so on, and we click yes to license agreements which we have no interest in adhering to. The use of FOSS doesn't really come up as an issue. However, a lot of times free and open source software is also free in cost. Free, there's no money to pay for it. And there's a whole range of applications. So the operating systems, like Linux, for example, and BSD, which runs the GUI domain. There are a whole range of applications like LibreOffice and others, and there are databases, internet browsers, all sorts of things. So free and open source software offers the opportunity to customize applications, to expand the range of applications which are available to people in developing countries. And in the context of environmental management and conservation, and Roxroy is going to talk a little bit about quantum just now, which is one of the ones used for geographic information systems. We also have Sahana, which is used for disaster risk management, and Ushahidi, and we'll look at those a little bit later. And another element of looking at cost is the use of open source hardware. And open source hardware is very similar to the idea that you should allow the hardware design and so on to be available for free. So it allows recycling, replacement of parts, improvement in design, and things like that. So that too is an emerging area. And open source hardware, not only referring to computer hardware, but any kind of technology or non-technological device, even extended to things like buildings and so on, which you can use to where other people can peer design and improve on the design of the items. Now, the kind of skills that we have, basic literacy is an issue in Guyana. I don't know how many of you read and write well. And no others. This whole idea of functional literacy, reading and writing, really critical. But the information society requires that people can read and write, or read and type. Even if you're only typing UR and all those things, the bottom line is you have to be able to communicate in ways which are not always oral. Even though, of course, now you can do video and things like that, but that's with high bandwidth. Then there's digital literacy skills, so to understand how to use the technology well, how to protect yourself when using the technology from all of the cyber attacks, etc., and how to protect the equipment and the technology that you're using. We need skills in programming and application development within the country. Those skills are, there's a great concern because we will need, if we want to contribute to the use of IT and to the development of applications, people need to know how to program. And there's an ongoing concern that in Guyana, for example, the ability to program and among the programmers and the interest in programming is declining because people think it's too hard. And then the fourth one, which is really interesting, is the skills in data analysis for knowledge creation. So you might have access to data and all sorts of things are coming around, but how do we analyze this data? How do we analyze it quickly, make it relevant, to make some use of it so that we can actually apply it to what's going on around us? Right? So the fact that we had 2 overtoppings in the last 2 years, what's really going on? Is it that the seawall getting weak? Is it because Sabine is down there blocking it? What? What's going on with it? Right? So all of these things that we have to develop these skills in critical thinking using data. And critical thinking is something that's also hard to do. And a lot of us don't like doing it. Now, the policy and legislative framework as a challenge, it's that we can talk all we want about ICT and applications, but really and truly, you need to have a proper policy framework in terms of how, you start with policy and then you develop the laws and so on to back up what's going on. And for example, in 2006, Guyana had just before the elections, there was a big ICT for the policy developed, and it was just there on the website. In fact, that website no longer exists, but there was nothing done with that policy afterwards. It spoke to some of the ways in which IT would be used in education and health, etc. We need a good legislative framework, and we know it takes a little while for laws. You know that we had cybersecurity issues. Right now, if somebody steals your password and hacks into your account, there's not much you can do in the Guyana legal system about that, right? E-commerce legislation is needed, because if you're going to be trading online, it's complicated. If you and I are going to have a contract online, are you having a contract with someone in the States? Where does that agreement fall? And if one person doesn't meet the requirement, what will happen? When you go to buy something from Amazon and the thing isn't delivered, whose fault is it, and who do you, in terms of consumer affairs, who do you sue, etc. Security concerns. So again, if someone is hacking illegal in Guyana, probably not. Only in Jamaica the other day that they had, I think Jamaican law they used, there was a guy who hacked into Digicel and he gave out about $10 million Jamaican dollars worth of Digicel credit. The guy was fined and charged. I mean, a lot of us cynics were saying, no, the guy should be hired by Digicel to be their security advisor. And then, of course, there's the issue around intellectual property. Because if you don't have an intellectual property arrangement in place, people will not want to create if they're not certain that their intellectual property would be provided. If they want to use intellectual property, if you're going to go down the free and open source and the Creative Commons route, in which all knowledge is open and available, then that doesn't necessarily be an issue. Okay, so in terms of applications, so the first major one is the Geographical Information Systems, which Roxroy will talk about. And then the second thing is in remote sensing and early warning systems, how we use the technology for that. We look at ICT for disaster risk management. And then I thought I would organize the rest of the presentation according to the future we want. Multi-stakeholder engagement, knowledge sharing, capacity building, food security, sustainable agriculture, energy efficiency, youth education. And in all of the time that I'm talking about the ICTs here, the kind of tools I'm talking about are things like websites, social media, mobile apps, etc. Right? Okay, so this is a diagram of how remote sensing early warning systems work. It's out in Germany. And essentially, this is a tsunami detection system, and the simulation suggests within 15 minutes of an earthquake happening on a flow bed or on the ocean bed, it's that you can generate a warning on land about that a tsunami is about to happen. I think that's what there are usually alerts that you would have heard about, in which because the ocean bed generates the signals. So it's a communication between the sensors generating, then signals are sent to transmitters, they go up to satellites, and then the satellites beam it to the relevant stations, right? And again, there are early warning systems for all sorts of others. There's tsunami, there's other disasters as well. They're not very good ones for earthquakes at the moment. I mean, this system will happen after the earthquake happens on the ocean bed. It doesn't predict that the earthquake will happen. All right? Now, Sahana is free and open source software to help with disaster risk management. And this is actually from our own Civil Defense Commission, who is working on an implementation of Sahana. And what this does is it allows you to implement a variety of things, like when a disaster, you set up a database of volunteers, of organizations, you set up situation mapping, you have a missing person registry, so where people can now register if people have been lost, especially children, organizations, the kind of equipment that you have, so the CDC in the Caribbean, for example, all the disaster response agencies within the Caribbean usually have a common inventory of equipment, so they can know if they need boats. If something happens in one country, they can share across other countries and so on. Right, so Sahana, that's one kind of application. Now, Ushahidi, this actually is another bit of software which was developed after the Kenyan crisis a couple of years ago, the last Kenyan elections. There was awful violence after the elections. So what they did is they created this software in which people could text, use SMS and so on, to text from locations, what was going on, what were the incidents happening, and then using open maps, you then have an idea of how incidents, how you can track what's going on across the country. This was then converted into a disaster response tool, and it was used during the Haitian earthquake in 2010, in which persons across Haiti who had access, because remember, so during the earthquake, the first thing they restored was a lot of the cell towers. Digicel was very popular there, so people could text and so on, say this is what was going on here, this is what was needed, etc. And then those who were managing could then filter the information accordingly and very easily. This, of course, is all on the internet, right? So this helps with trapping information from multiple sources very quickly, right? Okay, so ICT and multi-stakeholder engagement, and this is around the areas, and I put 3 areas here: e-governance, advocacy and activism, and online journalism. So the multi-stakeholder engagement is that when decisions are being made, how do we become involved in the decisions if we are interested in them? Okay, so again, this is the CDC website, very simple. Are you aware, did any one of you attend any of the consultations they had? No, nobody bothered, right? They had 2 consultations, one on the multi-hazard preparedness plan, and the other one was on the early warning systems. But very simply, on their website, and they also have a Facebook page, so they put up their document, and you can send feedback and comments through email as well. So even if you didn't attend the public consultations, you could just communicate with the CDC through the internet. And this is a way, of course, of engaging a larger population of people. The Ministry of Natural Resources and the Environment, on their website, they also have this Pick It Up Guyana National Environment Enhancement Strategy. Were any one of you involved in anything? Did you go to any of the consultations? You went? Yeah. Did you give any feedback on the document? Okay. So when the people ask you for feedback, you almost give the feedback, Because you don't want them to start saying, well, we put the thing out there, nobody said nothing. It's like, it looks a little crazy, right? So again, here they have their document on their website, and they're asking for feedback from people on the website. Very simple, but this now again improves participation. It's very easy to give feedback this way. Right, advocacy and activism, using the internet for this. Anyone of you ever signed any petitions online to save any whales, save forests, stop mining? Okay, so avaz.org is one of the big, it's a massive online initiative which is called Democracy in Action. Millions of people are part of it. And there are always ongoing campaigns. And this particular one I'm showing is the Monsanto versus Mother Earth. Do you know who Monsanto is, or what Monsanto is? Okay, so Monsanto is one of the big agricultural companies that has been patenting a lot of seed technology and ways of growing. And in this case, what they're trying to do now is to patent, again, some of the basic things that we take for granted, how we do, how we plant and how we distribute seeds. Are you aware that there are many plants we have now where we can't plant the seed again? Genetically modified, so every time you want a crop, you have to go and buy the seed? Right, so what starts happening is that instead of the plants being regenerative, is that you have to actually, every time you want to plant a crop, you would have to buy the seed from Monsanto or any other big company. And it's a little scary when you think about it. The fact that you are not allowed to plant a seed again because you might be violating some agreement, some patent. So this is a petition here from Avaz to stop it. So the whole kind of advocacy and activism around the internet, and this is what there are. Lots of petitions, to protect people, protect forests, stop deforestation, to have involvement in policy. And it's good, as you check in on them, there are also human rights issues and so on. And there's like change.org and a couple of other places. And of course, there are places where you can start your own petitions. Online journalism, and you might want to know what on earth, why you would be involved in online journalism. It's because environmental issues aren't necessarily seen as sexy issues to sell to newspapers and so on. So newspapers might not carry and have the same emphasis on environmental issues as you might want. But the internet allows you the opportunity to produce your own stories. And this, of course, is Earth Times as one example of an online journalism site. But it doesn't stop you with the technology you have available. I push this because I'm teaching the online journalism course, is that you can then create your own content, your own news, depending on what you're dealing with, and share it on the internet. You're not beholden to the media giants. You can produce your own content. Okay, for knowledge exchange and capacity building, how are ICTs used? And again, this is now around learning. UNDP has a platform called the ALM platform, and that's the link for it. There is also the climate change planning, in which they have tools for you to assess how countries are responding to climate change and adapting to climate change. For those of you doing environmental studies, when you graduate, you're going to be looking for work, and this is the kind of thing you need to know to be able to use. You're probably not going to be using anything that you've learned in your degree here, right? So just make sure you're familiar with what's going on around there and be able to use it. And then, of course, there are things like the OpenCourseWare, produced by many universities, like, for example, MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. They have a lot of courses with content, and they produce all their slides and so on. And the content is available. And I also put there NASA. Not only universities would have content available, but like NASA, the American NASA, they have tutorials on how you can use the Landsat data. Right? So lots of tutorials are there for people who need to use Landsat data. And the third, and then the other item I put there is how we use ICTs to improve the design of buildings, of all sorts of other, any device, cars, any device that interacts with the environment through computer-aided design. And again, how we share that knowledge. Okay, so I'm going to rush through now. Food security and sustainable agriculture. I don't know if you guys are aware that they had something, UG was hosting something called Code Sprint a couple of weeks ago. So one of the applications that came out is this one called the Farmers App, in which the guys are designing an application which will look at pricing and allow the farmers to understand the pricing mechanisms and predict how their crops will be sold, so they don't end up with gluts or scarcity. Right? So this is just an example, but there are other like agriculture information systems and so on, in which farmers then have direct contact with buyers, and also they can also become informed about new technologies, other threats, etc., so that they can avoid middle persons, and there's data sharing all the time. So I just share here the clipping from Starbuck News about the Farmers App as an example of ICT, food security and sustainable agriculture. Now, in using ICTs to monitor energy consumption, that is one thing in terms of the grid. So places like GPL and so on, whichever, they tend to have to reuse, the idea that you should have applications that help them to understand what's happening. Coming back to the issue of design, when we're designing our buildings, how we design buildings to reuse water, how we design buildings to use energy efficiently, ensuring that we don't have to use too many fans and air conditions and so on, even if you're air conditioning, kinds of air conditioning that you use, and how you seal off rooms, insulate them, etc. So I'm going to show you a short clip here. Right, so that's just an example of how you use mobile apps and so on to link into using a bike rather than a car to move around the place. Okay, the next item is the idea of youth education using ICT for e-learning in schools, and this is a story from Starbuck News last week Sunday. Some of you might have seen it. in which there is a micro-learning project in which on using mobile devices is going to be curriculum generated. And this is a picture from Tagore Lab. Anybody here went to Tagore? Apparently. And your students here from Tagore? Okay, right. So this is just as an example of one of the initiatives in Guyana, but there are many others. There are challenges to this, of course, because of cost, bandwidth access, and so on, which have to be met. Okay, so some things for you to start thinking about. How are you yourself using ICTs beyond Facebook and BlackBerry and messaging and checking up on your ex-girlfriend and ex-boyfriend and so on? How are you using them? And for you to start thinking strategically, are you producing content for the internet? Are you accessing some of the additional courseware materials to learn? Are you signing petitions? Are you giving feedback to the government when they're asking you for consultation and so on initiatives that they're doing? So that's the first question for you to ask yourself. The second thing is to start thinking of some of the applications and things that you can ask for. Because like what happened with that code share with the issue with the farmers is that the IT developers are not going to exist in a vacuum. They will need to see some kind of demand. And if you're doing environmental conservation and management, you have to be able to say, look, this is what we need. This is the kind of things that we think we need here, and therefore they can then meet that kind of demand. It helps them to do that, right? And I have in the resource folder, which I'll share with you, there's a case study on ICTs and climate change in Africa from the IISD. The other thing is for you to keep aware of current issues in ICT. Any one of you here have one laptop, OLPF laptops? Yeah, okay, so there's one person at least. But just for you to keep touch of if these things are going around, what the training is and so on, to make sure that you're familiar with all the issues around licensing, applications, etc., so that you can more efficiently use it. And I'd say anything else which is for the discussion after this, in which you think you can do in terms of action, and people like myself who work in IT would understand. Just very basically, this on the I have the USB folder with some of this presentation and a couple of other materials of interest which you might like to have if you give me your flash drives. I don't have viruses on this, so you're pretty safe. Using Linux for those of you who came in later. All right, so thank you very much for this, and so I asked Roxroy to come on. If while we